Hey guys, Jeremy here with Simple Little Life, and welcome to installment number 25 of Viewers Knives. These are all knives that are made by you guys, the incredibly talented viewers of this channel. It's so cool to see what you guys are making. Let's get right into it. Now, for this first knife, I do need to apologize, and I lost the email with all the information about this knife. I do know that the gentleman that had made this, his name was Josh. It's a great looking blade. I like it. It's kind of a pseudo cleaver style. Very nicely done, but I totally just, in the process of editing and like saving the images to my hard drive, I don't know what happened to this email. So Josh, if you're watching this, if you wouldn't mind shooting me an email again just to let me know the information, the specifics about this knife, I can at the very least put it in the description below, or maybe we'll just feature it again in the next Viewers Knives video. But either way, this is a fantastic looking knife, great sheath there, and I thank you so much for sending this in. Alright, these next two knives are sent to me from Patrick, and he's from Germany. He just wanted to test out his skills as a knife maker to see if he could make a knife, and I would say they definitely turned out very well. He says in his email he's very proud of the result, and I really like a lot of the extra little details that you put into these blades. They look like incredibly handy tools, and again, with all those extra details, very nicely done. I hope these are not the last knives you make. Ethan is a 14-year-old knife maker from Washington State, and this is actually the 5th knife that he's made. He used low carbon steel for the blade, and he used a dark oak with steel pins to finish it off. He'd also made a leather sheath for this, and along with this knife, he's also done some other projects like a scimitar, a spear, and even a sickle. And you know what? Hearing 14-year-olds getting their hands dirty and making tools like this, that is such a cool thing. So Ethan, this looks really, really excellent. Keep up the great work. Jacob has been blacksmithing since 2007, but he hasn't really been into knives until the last couple of years. This is one of his more recent projects, and I think this is a really, really cool looking blade. And it's made from 5160, and for the bolsters he used buffalo horn and curly maple for the scales. I think this knife turned out really nice. It's one of those knives that when you look at it, you kind of want to just swing it and put it to work, because it looks like it's going to perform so well. Really great looking blade, Jacob. Keep up the great work, and thank you for sharing it with us. Chris is from New York, and he's sharing this, the second knife he's ever made, and this thing looks really, really cool. The steel he used is 1084, and he used walnut for the handle. He made this for his brother-in-law as a camping and hiking knife, and he also made the leather sheath. And he actually notes here that probably his most enjoyable part of this process was indeed the leather sheath. Even those mosaic pins, I'm understanding that he made them himself, and they actually glow in the dark. Here you can see a little bit of the glow-in-the-dark resin or epoxy or something that he used to make those pins. So really, really great looking blade. Chris, thank you for your wonderful email and for the kind words. This knife looks really, really cool. Next, we're going to go to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Gus is a 16-year-old blacksmith. He makes all of his knives entirely by hand, and his steel of choice is typically 01 tool steel or 1084. He also does some work with files and reclaimed materials, and does a lot of different hardwoods, exotic kokobolos, wenge, and other types of wood. I think these knives look really, really cool. You can definitely see a style in there, and they all kind of have the same flow and the same look, and they just look to be just wonderfully finished knives, and knives that just look really, really comfortable. So Gus, keep up the great work. 16 years old making knives like this, that is so cool to hear. Christopher sent a picture of this knife that he's made, and this is a really interesting project because this entire knife was made with scraps. The steel is 17-4 stainless that he was given by the company he worked for. The handle is red oak, and it's actually salvaged from a shipping pallet, and then the pins are an unknown stainless. He made this entire thing with hand tools and put the bevel on with a file, sharpened it even with emery paper. So really this entire thing was done for pretty much, I would say the cost on this project would basically be nothing. Very inspiring to see people being this creative and make such useful tools out of really scraps. Very nicely done, Christopher. Thank you for sharing this with us. Alright, now we're going to head to Long Beach, California. Brian is a 59-year-old knife maker, and this is only his second knife. But the really cool thing about this knife is that he said in his email that it was actually these Viewers Knives videos that inspired him to make a knife. So essentially all of you guys who have shared your images, your pictures, you have actually inspired Brian to make his own knife, and that is such a cool thing. I find that quite amazing. Really, really interesting. The steel that he used for this knife was 01 tool steel, and he used desert ironwood for the scales, and you can see he put a lot of really nice decorative spine work on there with jeweler's files, and even the bevel, and everything here was done with hand tools. He made a beveling jig. Just a wonderful, wonderful piece that you've made here, Brian. Excellent work, and thank you for sharing this, and thank you to all of you for sharing your pictures. They've inspired this knife. That is so cool to hear. From California, let's head to Alabama. Now, Alan is a huge Forged in Fire fan. I mean, really, who isn't? And he said that show has really inspired him and really kind of got him thinking, could I make my own knife? You know, he ended up finding some steel from a scrap pile. Turns out it was just mild steel, but he went ahead and made this knife anyways. And you know, that's one question I hear all the time, and I hear people saying I can't make knives because I don't have good steel. You know, ultimately, The steps are the same whether using mild steel or really high carbon steel, and there's the whole process and the learning curve that isn't really affected by what type of steel you're using to make your knives. So on that one hand, I think it's such a great idea. If all you have is some mild steel, go ahead and make a knife. He does go on to say that he has ordered up some high carbon steel for his future projects, but I think this is a great start into knife making. When you think about Alan, there's steps and there's things that you've learned in this knife that are going to serve you well in the next one. Great job. Let's head straight east from Alabama and head to Georgia. Josh is sharing pictures of 2 knives that he's made. This first one here is actually the 4th knife that he's ever made. Now both of these knives he's sharing are 1095 steel, and he said that this first one here was the first time he had one that actually looked half decent. He was just starting on a 2x42 belt grinder, and he said at this point he is still kicking his butt. It's really difficult to learn. And now he says when we move over to this knife here, this is actually the 12th knife. He said his belt grinder is a lot more manageable. He's kind of figured how to use it much better, and you can just tell the difference between the 2 blades. The finish is much superior, and you can see his progression, that he's actually getting much better and learning as he goes. He says he sold a few knives just here and there to some friends and stuff just to make some money, to buy more materials, to put back into sustaining his hobby, and he says this is free entertainment. But Josh, excellent work, really cool to see your progression, and I can't wait to see what you're doing on your 20th and then your 50th knife. Keep up the great work. Matthias is a 31-year-old knife maker from Sweden, and he said in his email here that when he was a kid in school he used to make knives, but he hadn't done that for years and years. Seeing as he wanted to get back into it again, he found an old circular saw blade and used that as the steel for these knives. And this orange handled one, that's actually a hard plastic that they use for countertops, and he just found a piece of scrap and used that for his handles. He also put all that texturing in there with a Dremel tool, which is really cool. And then this next knife is actually one that he made for harvesting mushrooms. A slightly longer blade, a nice curved shape there. It looks like it would work really, really well. And he used some different woods for that. He used some mountain ash and some aspen wood, as well as he put in a mother of pearl inlay up near where the blade comes to the handle. That is really cool. I'm not sure how he did that, but when you look close, that little detail, that is really, really interesting. So you know what, Matthias, these are great looking blades. So cool to see you getting back into it, and just wonderful stuff you're making here. Keep up the great work. We are going to head from Sweden to Australia, and Riley has sent some pictures of some knives that he's made. A really cool story is that Riley's been making knives with the stock removal method since he was 10 years old. For his 12th birthday, somebody gave him an antique forge, and I don't know who gave that to him, but they certainly do know how to support a young person in the right ways. That is really, really cool. And he said here his dad finds a lot of leaf springs for him and gives him stuff to forge on. You know, he says that his work may not be all that professional yet, but he's really proud of it, and absolutely you should be, Riley. This is such a cool thing to see that you're making this stuff at 12 years old, swinging a hammer, getting dirty, and just learning this craft. That is really, really cool. Riley, I wish you much success. Keep up the great work, and thank you for sharing this. Alright, James just wanted to share some pictures of the first 2 knives he's made. Doesn't give much information on the steel, where he's from, his age, or anything like that, but that is totally cool. You know what? If you just want to share some pictures of your knives, that is alright with me. These are great looking blades. Really cool to see you making knives. James, great work. Alright, coming back to the United States, Steve is a 34-year-old knife maker from Kansas, and this is the 2nd knife he's ever made. He made this whole thing with basic tools. He used a angle grinder, a drill, and files. And he says here, lots and lots of sandpaper. He says he's learned a lot of these skills and little tips and tricks from watching this channel, as well as Walter Sorrells and Alex Steele, so that is really cool. It's glad to hear that you guys are soaking this stuff in and appreciating it, and that it's helping you guys. Biggest reason to make YouTube videos is to share your knowledge, for me at least. This is a great looking blade. The steel he used for that is 01 tool steel with brass pins, and the handles are Bokot. I think that's how you say it. I never remember how to pronounce these woods. Anyways, Steve, this is a great looking blade. I thank you for sharing it with us, and thank you for your very kind words. Alright, now we're going to go to Germany. Josh was a 15-year-old hobby knife maker, as he calls himself here, and he made this as an EDC for his dad. Really interesting thing about this is that he said this steel was from a 400-year-old cleaver. That's pretty cool. A lot of history in this little piece of blade steel, and then the fact that, you know, he's learning his skills and he turns this into a knife that his dad can use. That is really, really interesting. The wood, he said, was some wood from a jungle that he had left over from another project. He wasn't sure what it was, but I think this is a really cool knife. I'd like to try that in my hand and see what it feels like. It looks like it'd be a really useful little blade. So Joshua, keep up the great work, and thank you for sending this in. Devin is a 17-year-old knife maker, and he said that he was inspired by this channel, so I appreciate that. It's really cool to hear. And he made this knife based off of my skinning knife design, and if you've ever seen that in some previous videos, that is very, very similar to the knife that I personally use as my skinning knife. Very nicely done, Devin. Keep up the great work. Griff is sending pictures of this knife, and this was one that he made as a skinning knife for somebody. When he was making this knife, he had a hard time figuring out what he was going to use for scale material. After he had drilled the lanyard hole and then some holes to lighten it up, he kind of liked the look of it, and he thought, you know what, I'm going to add a little bit of notching here and there to give it a little bit more traction in the hand. And the result came out that he thought, you know what, I'm just going to leave it as it is. And when you consider that being a skinning knife, that looks like it would work really, really well. The steel that he used is CPM 3V, which is an excellent choice. He says it came out at 60 on the HRC scale, and I just think this is a fantastic job. I think as far as the skinning knife goes, you just nailed it. Looks like it'd be excellent to use and serve its purpose very, very well. Nicely done, Griff. Makai is a 13-year-old knife maker and wanted to share pictures of this knife. I'm not entirely sure what the blade steel is, but the wood that he used is Bolivian rose. I think this knife looks really, really good, really comfortable. Again, one of these knives that just looks like it would work so well in the hand. Great shape there. Makai, keep up the excellent work. This knife looks fantastic. Janik is an 18-year-old knife maker from Germany. He says he's learned a lot from this channel, so I sure appreciate hearing that. He just wanted to share the results of this recent knife that he's finished. And while he says he hasn't gotten around to removing all the scratches from grinding it yet, he's really happy with the result. And I know exactly what the feeling is. You know, when you make your first knife and you realize that you can create a very usable tool and a knife, you know, you can actually make a knife, the feeling is just excellent. So Janik, I'm really excited to see your progress here. This looks fantastic. I'm glad you're enjoying it, and I hope you keep making knives and keep having a lot of fun with it. Alright, we're going to wrap up this edition of Viewers Knives with this knife right here. This is the very first knife that Jonathan has made. He's a 30-year-old from Idaho, and he said that his wife's adopted father helped him build this knife. He used a file for the blade steel and elk for the handle materials, elk antler. I think this looks really, really fantastic for such a project as your very first knife to come out like this, and such an ambitious one as well. I hope you keep making knives, Jonathan, because this looks really, really great. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I thank you so much to all of you who send your knives in. If you'd like to have your knife featured on this channel, just email me, jeremy@homesteadknives.com. Keep in mind there is a backlog. The knives that I featured in this video are from October 9th, 2017, so be patient with me. We will get it featured, and I just thank you so much for watching. You know, feel free to leave your comments and support for the makers down below. And again, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to this channel already, I would sure appreciate it if you did so. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Cheers.